Hello, YouTube. So today we are back with another part to our snake game tutorial using Python and Pygame. So to start with, I'm going to introduce a few items here. We're going to get into a couple of functions. We're going to wrap the main function. We're going to try and add food at a random location. We're going to do a little bit of cleanup on our config by adding another dictionary for our colors to make sure that our colors are all, in an organized location where we can go, okay, we need to adjust our colors to make the theme look better. So to start with, we're going to start at the top. I'm going to import random because we're going to need that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and make our colors dictionary here. And we're going to go ahead and take our minty green and our red, and we're going to move them up here. And then right here, I'm going to introduce a new value here called background. And it's going to be colors, minty green. And then we just need to make sure we have a comma there. That's good. The snake is going to be the same way. We're going to introduce color. And we're going to tell the snake that it is going to be colors red. And then to correct things down here, instead of config red, it's going to be snake color. Instead of config minty green, it's going to be config background. Very nice. So we'll test that real quick. See, it's still the same. Now, we have that. So let's go ahead and introduce a food dictionary. And we're going to need a color for the food. So I'm going to make a light blue. And we'll make that 0 red. Give it 128 green. And we will put 255 for the blue. And then what we do down here is X, because we need the X location. And that's going to be 0. And we're going to go with Y. And the reason why we're putting 0 here is because we're not going to use these default values. We just need to make sure that it knows that we're putting an integer value there. So X, Y, and then the last one we need is color. And that color is going to be that light blue that we put up top. Very simple. Doesn't need much. We just need to know where it's going to be and what color it's going to be. So when we come down here, we can draw it in using the same sort of structure that we used here. Only instead of this, it's food. We replace snake with food. Now, what that'll do right now is just kind of put a food block in the upper left corner. It's again X0 and Y0 is up there in the left corner. So now we got to randomize it. Well, to do that, we introduce a function. So I'm going to do def for define, randomize food location, these parentheses, and a colon. Now, anything that exists in the code block underneath it, which is an indentation here, is going to define our code block. Is going to belong to this function and only get called when we call the function. So what we're going to do is we're going to go food x is going to be equal to round, and then inside of this, it's going to be random.randRange. So we're going to do this in layers, and it might be a little easier to understand if I break it out a little bit, but I'm going to try and break it easy as much as possible by, well, I'll break it down as much as possible here in a moment. So in the random range, it's going to be between 0 and big screen x minus config block size, because we don't want it to be off to the right of the screen or down below the screen. But we're rounding this number with a -1. So what's happening here is we're generating a random number based on a range between 0 and the maximum size of the screen minus the size of the block size. So um, let's say screen X 800 minus 10, that'd be 790. And that, so it's going to be 0 to 790. And then this rounding is actually going to go on the decimal, one location left of the decimal. So it's going to round to a 0. And that'll give us to the nearest 10. That will keep us in line with the movement of the snake, because the snake will always be at a 10 position because it's a block size of 10. So it can't ever not be in a 10-10 location. So we need to do the same thing with the food Y location. And we do that by just changing this from X and Y, from X to Y on those two locations. Now, before we can do anything, we need to call this function because we're going to do it at least once outside of the loop. And then down here, we're going to draw it. Now, what's going to happen is it should be a random location that the snake can basically be in line with. So you can see it is in line with my snake head. I can't collide with it yet because I haven't built that part out, but that's there. Now, we've added, there we go, close this up because it ran into the wall. We've added a function. We can call this anywhere. We call it down here because we need to do it once before we get into the game loop so that we know where to draw the first food. The next part comes, and I want to first, before we dive too far in, I want to take this part down here and we're going to define a thing called main. This will be the main function of our application. And this is going to be good form going forward, so I want you guys to be aware of it. We're going to tab all that in, one indentation, to make it part of this main function. So everything will be happening off of this main function. So outside of that main function, we're going to add if name equal to main. Then we are going to run the main function. What this does is says if we are running this file directly, if this is the file we're executing, then we're going to go to the main function. But if we import this file, it's not going to run the main function, but we could still leverage food, snake, config, and colors up here, and this Pygame init, though we didn't assign it to anything, it'd be easy to call. This is the part that we would not get because we're not calling the main function, but we could still call the main function from another location. It'd just be tricky. So this is kind of to protect us in our import value. So if we import the file to another location, not a big deal. Just wanted to do that so that we could lift it up and kind of get in line there so everybody could see it. But I didn't want to do that until we talked a little bit about functions, which is where we get in with the randomized food. Now, if we wanted to give parameters, we could. Not currently doing that. But basically, this is a repeatable piece of code that we could just make a quick call to and say, hey, run this stuff. And that is the other piece that we're going to get into, which is I want to take all of this. We could put that into another function and call it, draw, right? So if we wanted to be like def draw game, make that the function. We could take all of this, put it right inside here. Although it does not like the screen because the screen happens to be in game, right? So we could pass it the screen. And then what we do down here would be draw game and give it screen. So every iteration, it would give the screen over to this function. It would update it all, and then go back into main and continue. And so this is going to break it functionally for us to make it a little easier. Now, let's come up here, run it again. As you can see, nothing is broken out of what we just did. It's running a little bit fast for a snake game typically, so we might reduce our frame rate a little bit more by bringing our speed down. I'm just going to bring this down to 15. And there we go. That's a little bit better, a little more manageable. Now, we already have this collision with the wall. So we know that this breaks us out if we collide with the wall. But what if we want to collide with the food object? So what we actually need for that, if snake x is equal to food x and snake y is equal to food y. Right? Because that just basically says, hey, snake x and y are now in line with food x and y. We're hitting the food. We collide with the food. Let's just print, you eat delicious apple. Now, I'm not doing anything with this just yet. I'm printing this out so that we can see that our collision is functional. So it didn't change where it went to. But as you can see, we are eating delicious apples. I could do this all day and just make eat delicious apples. So we hit that, and then we hit a wall. But you can see it's eating a delicious apple. Fantastic. We know we have a collision with the food object. Well, if we want to make the food object move, we call this randomized food location function, and we can move the apple. Just do that. So now let's run down here and eat the apple. As you see, it's now moving. Now we're not recording this anywhere. We're just printing out that we ate the apple and we're running into it. This proves our collision and ability to randomize the location of the apple. Now, sometimes what will happen is the apple will form under your tail because we don't have any collision items for that. And we also don't, because we don't have the tail yet. The apple could form right underneath the snake and then it would just get eaten twice, but it's a lot less likely to happen than it just showing up somewhere else on the screen. But as you can see, it moves it around fairly randomly, just as we hit things. Let's go ahead and run into a wall and close the app. There we go. So that is an important part, to have the food and have it just kind of move around. To keep this video light, I think this is where we're going to cut for now. But the same idea of what we've been talking about the whole time, which is all of our configuration happens up here. So we can configure new colors. We can set as many colors as we want and have them configured here. We have the ability to adjust the color of the food by just putting the colors in the food item. Snake has its own build. The config has its own build. You can see we can adjust the background by changing this one. And this lets us this is just kind of like making it a little cleaner for us to work with. We change values up here, just like I changed the speed a minute ago, and it changes things throughout the application, which is what we want. Our randomization, same deal. We don't really have much of a magic number aside from the 0 and the -1 here, which is fine because it's, obviously we're starting at 0 and then we go out to the configured size minus the configured block size. Then we round it to the closest 10 to make sure that we're not off center from the snake. So we're not hitting it from an edge, because then you'd have to make sure that you have an XY position that can meet that value. So we can run into the food. We're interacting with it here. and then we randomize it. So we are getting closer to having a fully functional snake game. The next part is going to be to code in the tail, and that's going to be a little bit involved. So again, to keep this video short, that's where we're going to stop here. I will be pushing this as part 3 to my GitHub. It's going to be in the branches of the GitHub, so you can look at part 3's code and compare to your own. If you have any issues, feel free to comment them down below. Thank you all so much for your time. Y'all have a wonderful day.